Hi, welcome to Season 1, Episode 7 of Impact Effectively. I'm Florence Madden. I'm a management development trainer, an NLP trainer and coach based in Cumbria in the north of England. I'm the co-author of a book called Everyday NLP and the author of The Intention Impact Conundrum, on which this series of podcasts is based. And as the name implies, it's all about understanding the impact that we're having on ourselves and others, and if it's not what we want, what we can do about it. In some of the earlier podcasts, I have been making reference to the importance of the language we use, and specifically talking about the impact that that has on our unconscious mind, without necessarily, up to this point, going into any detail about the unconscious mind. So in this podcast, I want to look at the roles of our conscious and unconscious mind and why it might be important to understand more about those. So I've entitled this podcast, Who is Driving Your Ship? I have to say, my husband questioned that title and said, don't you mean who is sailing your ship? And I said, well, it's actually a tribute to someone who was a delegate on one of my courses. And when he was describing his role, he said, I drive a ship. He was actually the captain of a ferry. And to a landlubber like me, and I suspect other delegates, I was rather impressed and in awe of somebody that had such a role. The idea of a captain of a ship and the crew of a ship is actually a rather nice metaphor for our mind. Our conscious mind has been compared to the captain of a ship, in that it is up to the captain to decide in which direction the ship goes and to get it there safely. But to do that, the captain has to understand and be able to manage his or her crew effectively. So it's a technical job in some respects, and it's a man management job in other respects. The captain doesn't need to be able to do what the chief engineer does, but nonetheless has to understand that person's role and be able to converse effectively with them. Because unless the captain has the crew with them, they're not going to get safely to their destination. So it's believed that only about 10% of our behavior is controlled by our conscious mind, which means that our unconscious mind is in control of more than 90% of it. Let me at this juncture, though, just clarify the names that I'm using here. You may be more familiar with people referring to their subconscious mind. Conscious and unconscious are just ways of describing what we are consciously aware of in the moment, the conscious mind, and everything else that's not got our attention in that moment is our unconscious mind. So things drift in and out of our conscious mind depending on where our attention goes. So knowing more about how our unconscious mind works will actually help us get our outcomes, get to our destination more effectively. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Tad James, who is a developer within NLP, has identified 21, what he refers to as prime directives of the unconscious mind. In other words, duties and responsibilities. Now, some of these will be very apparent to us. So, for example, our unconscious mind runs our body. We don't have to think about making our heart beat or getting ourselves to breathe. These things happen anyway. This is happening in the background, fortunately. And even when we're asleep, our unconscious takes care of all of that. It stores our memories. We can guess that. And as I've mentioned now on a few occasions, the unconscious mind is aware of what we're saying. It hears everything that we are saying about and to ourselves. And then, rather in the manner of an obedient 5-year-old child, it looks to prove us right. So in previous podcasts, when I was talking about being careful about making criticisms of ourselves, if we make a criticism of ourselves, for example, how we conducted ourselves in a meeting, our unconscious mind will dutifully go looking for the evidence that proves that criticism. It also applies what we say about other people to ourselves. So when we're critical of other people, our unconscious will also apply that to us as well. Of course, all of these work the other way around when we are genuinely complimentary about ourselves and others. Our unconscious hears that too. It doesn't like to use too much energy, so it will go for how it achieves what it thinks we want the quickest way it can. So when we're setting goals, rather than saying, I want to have a better job, we need to be a wee bit more specific. Better in what way? Closer to our house, paid more, working with nicer people. The better we are at setting out what we want, then the more the unconscious can understand that. It is also highly moral. So the times when we are thinking or doing something that goes against that moral code, we know that little voice that's there. So there's an awful lot going on under the hood, as somebody once commented. And the more we're aware of it, then the more effectively we can captain our own ship. So, although there's a lot of things that are already in place, the prime directives that I talked about, the rather good thing about our mind is that it is up for development. It is not something that is static. It was once kind of thought that the development of the brain, neuroplasticity of the brain, was the preserve of very young human beings. But the rather heartening thing, wherever we've got to in life, is that our brain is always capable of development. It is always capable of forming new habits and therefore getting different results. So when we're aware of it, we can train our brain to do things that are going to help us more. So, for example, we have a natural threat response. And if we're going into a meeting where we may be a little concerned about how that meeting might go, it's not terribly appropriate to turn and run in the opposite direction. So it may seem odd, but our brain would interpret that as a threatening situation. And yet, changing our self-talk is one way of managing that threat response and enabling us to show up in that meeting confident and able to handle some of the questions that may be brought to us. As I mentioned earlier, we can also be much clearer at setting our goals, being much more specific about what success in any venture would look like. We can be aware that when we see behavior in others that we like or dislike, that in a way, other people are like a mirror to us. And behavior that is in some ways reminiscent of ours, the unconscious will select for our attention. So it's great when we see things in other people and admire them. There's something there that tells us a bit about us as well, which is kind of nice feedback. Similarly, when we see other things in people that we don't like, there's a bit of feedback to us too as well that says, how is that also true of me? So those are just some of the ways in which understanding how our unconscious mind works can help us to develop new habits that will enable us to behave more confidently, set effective goals, give ourselves some feedback, and give other people feedback in a way that is far more helpful. I want to finish today on a quote from Dr. Rick Hanson, who said, "There's a traditional saying that the mind takes on the shape that it rests upon. The modern update is that the brain takes on the shape that the mind rests on." So where are we placing our focus? Whether it's about our goals, whether it's about how we present ourselves, or whether it's about how we give and receive feedback. So thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. If you want to find out more about my books, the other podcasts, and the courses that I run, you can find that information on my website, which is www.florencemadden.co.uk. And next week's podcast, I hope you'll join me for that, is how do others see it? So thank you for now, and I hope to see you again next week. Bye for now.